Greetings. Welcome to the Business Sense with Brad podcast. Before we dive into the episode, I always like to give my book a quick overview. So, if anyone's interested in motivating employees in today's work environment, check out The Motivated Worker. You can find it at Amazon, Bookshop, or McFarland. I'm also doing consulting. So, if you're looking at Six Sigma or business strategy, find me on LinkedIn, Brad Ward. You should just be able to find me there and type in the podcast name, and I'm easy to find. So, on this episode, we're going to be talking about AI at Eastman, which is a Fortune 500 company. There's a lot of confusion about what AI can and cannot do. On this episode, we're going to talk about what software should students be learning, what should be the first steps in approaching AI and kind of demystifying it. And then how is it being used in industry? And really, that's where the direction of this episode is going to go. All right, so our guest today is Andrew Ervin. He is Generative AI Manager at Eastman, so welcome aboard.
Thanks, Brad.
So, let's just get started. What exactly is generative AI? And explain it to me, Michael Scott style from The Office, like I'm 5-year-old. The lemons. I don't know if you ever watched that show, but the
Yeah.
lemonade stand episode. But anyway, break it down for those that might not even have a clue what that means.
Sure. So I think the easiest place to start is just it's at its core, really what it is it's using AI to write or speak or draw or make videos or to create. So that's the generative piece of it. A lot of the time, maybe up until the last 2 years, we really thought about AI as something that predicted the future or something that gave you directions about what you should do, like self-driving cars or um, you know optimization models. Like what should I do? How should I think about what's going to happen, or how can I understand things better? And generative AI is, I think, the first time that really we've moved into using AI in the space of art and in the space of stuff that isn't like, it's not math. At least that's not what we're aiming for. I'm not trying to predict things, although it is predicting stuff to get to what it does. I'm trying to say, like, how can I create something with AI? And it's not, the new stuff is not the first time this has been done, but it's the first time people have thought about it. So that's my short sell is it's AI that writes and draws and makes videos and goofy songs and then sometimes actually has real business value.
All right, well,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So I think when we're generating things, I think one of the issues people have is AI really generating it, and this gets into the whole idea of what is intelligence, because is it like I still think it's predicting to a degree. Like, okay, I want, like, let's say I tell it to make me a picture of a sunset or this and that, and I don't like it, it's gonna have some type of like, okay, I didn't like that, and then it'll spit me out something else or whatever. But all of those things that it's doing has some foundation somewhere. And of course, I think human beings are the same way. I don't know where all of my influences come from, or they're partly like, I don't directly know where all my thought patterns are based off of, and all those kind of things. Like, there's some things I know for sure. Like, if I'm using a model by Michael Porter, I know for sure that it comes from him. But then there's other things that I'm not. It's like, oh wait, I don't know where I learned that. So I don't know. Is AI somewhat like that, where it's pulling stuff and it might be plagiarizing? I don't know if that's the way to say it.
So yeah, so I think first off, it is predicting. You can generally think about Chat GPT and the other stuff that's like it, that sort of is a text based AI. Like, at its core, it's a next word predictor. So you give it some text and it says, okay, well, based on all of the English and non English stuff that I've seen, here's the next 20 words I think are most likely to come up, and a probability for each one. And then I roll the dice and I pick a word and I tack it on, and then I do it again until I decide I need to stop. And so, in some sense, like, it is predicting it. And the image generators are a little bit different, but I don't think it's like fundamentally that far off. The difference really is like how we think about it, not what it is. So like why I would say well, yeah, it's definitely predicting next words. It's something different than a predictive model, is because the intention that I place on it is different. Like I'm not using Chat GPT to predict what would a person say next. I'm using it as a tool to extract some information, or to have a conversation. So yeah, I think really at some point it's a semantics discussion around like what does predicting mean to you. Separate from that piece, well, is it regurgitating what it's trained on? Is it something novel? Is it creating? What does it mean to be creating? I think those are much tougher questions that, yeah, I don't know that I'm well equipped to answer, because they're philosophical questions. But the short of it from my side is, if what comes out of it is not meaningfully distinguishable to you from something novel, then it is novel. It doesn't matter if it's an artifice or it's real, because you are the critic in that situation that's judging the content. And so, like, if you're tricked, it's real. But the plagiarizing comment, it definitely can reproduce content from its training set. You can have it like directly recall a piece of text. It's very difficult to do, and there are a few cooked examples where people have shown their ability to do that. But generally, what it feels like is something different, and I think that feeling of being different is really what distinguishes it. It's something that, unlike, I don't know, like a forecasting model, or a linear regression model, or a self-driving car even, it's something that feels intelligent in a way that other stuff we haven't dealt with before feels, at least to me, and I think to a lot of other people. But that's why I would distinguish it from prediction, is because categorically how I use it is different, and what it feels like to me as a user is fundamentally different. And look, we may be like a year away from just writing this off and being like, yeah, of course it felt different when we'd only used it for 6 months, but now I'm just used to this.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, and like whenever I use, like if I'm on, I started using Bing again. I thought Microsoft was like extinct like 3 years ago, and then they put in whatever they got for. I can't remember. Are they? I can't remember if they have GPT or whatever. But it almost feels like when it tries to tell me something, I'm like, it looks like it just randomly grabbed a bunch of web stuff, threw it together real quick, and gave me like the stew of it. So that's
Yeah,
how I see it right now. But again, I'm not using it in an in-depth way. But again, I
yeah,
would say it doesn't know like in an intelligence way. Again, it's like the semantics versus syntax. I mean, it's yeah. So anyway, I don't want to get too lost in that. So, um, before we get into how you're using it or whatever, let's say that because I teach business students mostly, and many of them have very limited software background. I could be a dinosaur here. I'm still teaching them Excel, but I teach them how to make like histograms from scratch, regression from scratch, and all those kind of things. Is there any value in that in this world, or should they be going right into more complicated stuff? And again, I know that's a mix of math and software, but what are your thoughts on that?
yeah. So first off, I think the most important thing, and this is advice I would give to data scientists, I would give it to analysts, people coming out of business school, whether it's like MBA or traditional business bachelor's, or MSBA. But the really important thing, the most important thing, is the data. It's not the tool, it's not the model, it's the data itself. Like everything starts at the data. And so the pathway to learning to really dig in to source data, understand it, tear it apart, clean it up, and really get an intuitive feel for the subject that it relates to, is so much more important than what is the weapon that I use to dissect it. Now, okay, that out of the way. I think that Excel is I think that Excel is still fundamentally, for most companies, a core piece of how people do analysis and look at data. I think that it is a huge bottleneck for most enterprises. because it doesn't create sustainable solutions, but it is an extremely practical and accessible tool for doing data analysis. And I think that for most people, Power Query and Excel are a fantastic start at getting into data. And in the next year or two, the integration of Python into Excel and Copilot for writing Python code inside of Excel will make it much more accessible for quick analysis. I definitely think it's a good starting place. Um, that said, I wouldn't be sad if it died tomorrow.
Well, so I came up. Here's my quick backstory. So I was a quality engineer at Denso Air Systems, which we supplied Denso, who had supplied Toyota back in like the early 2000s. And I had no coding background, so like at the time it was Visual Basic they were using. I didn't know what they were doing. I mean, I knew what I was all about the spreadsheet, like dissecting the data. I'm still pretty much like that. I've tried learning Python and R, and I just think coding. I hate to say I'm too old. I'm in my mid 40s now, but I'm like, do I really want to learn this when it's probably going to be obsolete tomorrow? I don't know, but I've at least spent a couple years trying to learn coding in general, and I'm like, the data is just for me. I love dissecting
Yeah.
data. I don't want to do the coding piece. Is there room for people like that in industry, or do they have to know coding?
There certainly is room for people who don't know how to program in industry. I would say the vast majority of people outside of IT are not active programmers in most Fortune 500 companies. I mean, tech companies excluded. Um, I think that for someone who's in school right now, there has never been a time where programming has been more accessible than it is now. And largely that's because of large language models through ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever else. I really think so. So, there's like a hierarchy of abstraction where like the first people programming, well, reasonably were using like something very close to ones and zeros. And at each sort of stage of development for programming languages, we've moved to more abstraction with assembly or C or Python, where it gets a little easier. You're a little further away from the nuts and bolts of what's happening. But up until Python, it's still syntax all the way down. It's just how much work do you have to get something out of it. I really think that large language models, especially like the last few models out of OpenAI, have gotten us much closer to a semantic programming option where what I can do is say, I want to solve this problem. Here's the data, here's what it means, and I want to do analysis on it. I want to do a statistical analysis. I don't even know what I want to do with it. I have a problem. Now, that's a really bad place to be from an analyst perspective, but you can start there and create Python scripts that do very deep analysis and very good analysis. And even you can have the language model help you think through how should I think about the output of this analysis. But because it can write code so well, I really think that almost anyone who's interested in working with data should at least be finding out for themselves if that's right for them. And it won't be for everyone. And it probably won't matter in another year or two because we'll have some wrapper around our programming stuff where I don't even have to think about what the code is. But for me, fundamentally, Excel, while very powerful, is just very challenging. And part of this is like coming from data science and coming from an IT background, because the thing that Excel does is it allows people to very easily create something that can't live on longer than they do. It doesn't have a way to easily control the versioning, to structure what you're trying to do, to put something that could be used by a bunch of people, at least not easily. I mean, there are exceptions to that. So yeah, I would say learning Python, worth it. Using ChatGPT to get into it, worth it. And knowing that what I'm getting out of this is not being a software developer that could go work at Google. What I'm getting is a broader analysis toolkit to help me understand the data, which is the real thing that I want to spend my time in.
Yeah, I find it interesting too because the way it's going to go is like I see this as like, people have spent let's say 4 years learning to code, and then all of a sudden it's pretty much a skill you don't need. which again I say don't need. You always have to know what's going on behind, if you will. But like I know people that have just learned that, and then they go work in a tech company or whatever. And now I think it's gonna be more accessible for the commoner to come in, not need to code. It reminds me of like website building. Used to have to know how to do all of that, and all of a sudden you click buttons and just don't use. I'm not a big fan of Weebly, but yeah, I've tried that one before, but yeah, clicking around is all clunky. But anyway, it's so easy now. Anyone can design a website without
Yeah.
knowing anything about coding, and I guess that's scary for people that have spent all their time on it, and then all of a sudden you get someone coming out to us. I don't know anything about coding, but you don't need it anymore. Is that a fear in industry that like, especially in the coding or the tech space, is there fear of like where people are like, I'm gonna it's gonna automate me out.
Yeah. So I've seen that concern from people in and out of programming roles. I think generally programmers are some of the most skeptical um, that I've encountered in terms of the utility of this. And a lot of that I think comes from senior programmers who see low quality code being generated by AI and getting put into production. And so essentially their feeling is like, well, yeah, it can solve a lot of the easy problems, but it doesn't build well architected solutions. And so I think there's a wide range for programmers of I'm very concerned about this. I have existential dread about what the future of my career is. To this is incredible. I love it. I'm going to use it all the time, and it's going to make me a powerhouse programmer. To the people who are doing number two are a disaster, and I wish that they would stop because they're creating a lot of technical debt that I'm going to have to pay back in the future. And so I really think that there's a wide range of opinions, and I've talked to people who have all of them, and I don't know who's right, but I certainly think that people who are concerned about their future because of the uncertainty of what this brings have a reasonable concern. I also think that none of us know.
And I think there's two. One thing I learned personally through COVID. I could be wrong, but like there was, we tried doing like obviously educators. You could, I can be replaced by a button today, but then there's something to be said about being, in the like especially for high school and younger students about not just being online all the time. And there's something about personal interaction, and there's some things you just can't outsource. And so I still think there'll be that need. For personal. I don't know exactly what it'll be though. Like, and again, I know might be going off track a little, but whenever I see like a blog and it says it's AI generated, I usually don't read it because I'm just like, well, anyone can do that. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I just don't know again if it's going to be this bubble that bursts like the tech of 2000 or whatever, or if it's here to stay. So again, I get the skepticism, but I also don't think we're going back either. I'm somewhere in the middle.
So my response to whether someone's reaction is, hey, this doesn't write code that is as good as a person, or this doesn't write an article or a blog as good as a person, would basically be if we hold it to a standard that is, I expect it to be better than the best person at that. That is a much different standard than do we expect it to be as good as a normal person. So in chess, if you build a system that plays chess and your standard for is it good is does it beat the best chess player? Well, if it does, then it's very good at chess. If it beats me at chess, it's probably pretty good. And I'm pretty smart, but I'm not that good at chess. If you write blogs for a living and you're a very compelling writer, and like something that you say sticks with a lot of people, then you're in the top percent of writers. Most people, when they write, it isn't that compelling. And so if our benchmark for like AI writing is as compelling as the best writers, well, that's a different standard than does it write well. And so for me, I think it's completely valid to say, look, I'm not going to take code that comes out of AI and put it into production because my standards are higher than where the AI's code is right now. But it's not the same thing to say that it's not competent at writing code.
Well, yeah, and I would say too, and I think it gets into where does insight come from, because it's like again with the blog, there's something about being human, whether it's spiritual or what have you, that I would say, okay, that was insightful. Where again, I just see the computer as being like it could stumble upon something insightful because it's again hyper predicting and being eloquent to a certain standard, but it doesn't know it's being insightful. It's like again, it's like is it real? Again, it's the what is intelligent, you know? So again, a lot of people aren't insightful either. So I guess you could go. Well, I think some people are insightful. I don't know if AI can be insightful. Now, I think this does get into though. It could sell for like again calculators never wrong unless you input something wrong. It can do a great job, way better job at humans that at like it can learn from itself, if you will, faster than a human, solve the thing, try to get to the answer way faster. But then if you're looking at art, and again I want to tie this into what you're doing and like what kind of things are you generating. I think there's some good things because it might be able to generate art for people that aren't good at art. And again, that's just not me. A guy from my hometown takes a photo. It's beautiful. I go to the same spot. It's trash. So there's something he's got. I don't know, insight or whatever. He's just got this skill to capture photography. I don't have that. Again, if we're drawing, painting, AI can do some of those things. I can usually tell what software, like Dolly or whatever. It's like, okay, that's a Dolly thing. Um, so again, I don't know if it when we get into the arts, especially out of the hard math, where AI stands. So I guess if you can maybe address that or like tie it into like what kind of things are you actually generating at Eastman?
So yeah, I'll answer the two separately because they're way different answers. We're
One's
not
philosophical,
generating
one's
art.
practical.
Yeah. So on the art, I would say two things. First, I think it's important to think about how much when you look at a piece of art and it speaks to you, how much of that is the person creating it speaking and how much of it is you speaking?
Well, yeah.
So
Well, and again, I would say, and you probably disagree with me or may disagree with me. I would say there's an objective quality. Like if someone's like a person is beautiful, generally speaking, most people would say that person is beautiful. So again, you could say eye of the beholder or not. Or is the mountain view beautiful? You might get one person out of 100 that's like, I don't like the mountain. But like
I
most would say it's beautiful. So I would say there's some objectivity to it. But again, you're asking how much of it's me thinking it's, but if you just even ran an algorithm and said, how many people think this is beautiful versus not, more would say my friend's art's better.
So I like that example because I'm ready for it. So okay, so two things. So first, I think, and this is just my own personal opinion, and I'm a musician. I also like generating AI music, and I think
I'm a
most of it.
drummer, just so you know.
Yeah.
We're
So I'm
starting
a
a
guitar.
band, people.
So I'm a guitar player and a mediocre keyboard and bass player. I'm a terrible drummer, but I love writing music. And I, at various times in my life, have been pretty good at writing music, but not exceptional. I think all of the AI songs I've generated have been funny at best and great songs never. But I think that comes from two things. One, part of what makes art enjoyable and meaningful to people is the stories that we tell ourselves about it. And so, I think the way that we develop connections to musicians and artists is a story that we project onto the music, not one that's inherent to it. Of course, there are songs that sound good and songs that don't to me and to you, and those may not be the same songs. The next piece is, and it ties to exactly your algorithm that rates songs. That's a step change away from where we are now, but it's not a crazy step. If you had a crowdsourcing thumbs up, thumbs down on songs, and you put a reward mechanism into the thing that generates the song, and you generate 1,000 and they go out to people and they go thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up, thumbs down, I am not at all convinced that you couldn't get to a place where the AI was out competing people at songwriting. I'm pretty confident that you could. I'm pretty confident that we are not far from being steamrolled on those things just the same as we were in chess. It's just that the world model, the objective function, the thing you're optimizing on, the thing that you get a signal that says this is good, that thing is easier to model in chess than it is in music. But that's an us problem, not a fundamental problem of the computer. So that's just my own personal opinion, and I'm happy to be wrong. So
Well,
the
and
stuff
before
we're
you move on, I do like
okay.
in that because, with the chess again, I just haven't followed chess. I watched the Queen's Gambit, which was pretty cool, but I was I just grew up with my grandpa and Bobby Fischer.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, like I could never beat a computer. But again, like you're saying, this is you're teaching it like if do this, then this, and it learns, and it can, again, like a calculator can think faster than a human and better if it keeps learning. So yeah, and then I think your example on the art or the songwriting is interesting. Now, good for humans, like there's certain things we will accept and not. Like if you have a band playing, we usually can accept that the tambourine is automated out. But if you just had a virtual person up there, we haven't got there yet. But the songwriting itself, that's an interesting point. Like
I'd actually say that in some places we are already at the virtual singer and okay with that.
auto tune.
No, but even past that, there are just like synthetic singers that we've accepted in different parts of the world as like a part of a music act. The Miku, I think, is like what they have like a synthetic voice from Japan that's been around for, I don't know, 10, 15 years now. You can get like even a little guitar pedal that'll Miku-fy your guitar.
Oh
And like
wow,
they
that's
have like,
interesting.
yeah, I don't know if it's like a hologram or just like a screen or whatever, but they have like a whole digital performance from this like synthetic singer. And that's not even like really, I mean, I don't know that that's not at the level that many of us would consider AI. I mean, certainly there's machine learning that's backing that, almost certainly. But okay, so all that to say, like, my perspective is just that we may just be a harder world model away from optimizing our way to like better songs. And the other piece of this is like a year ago, if I asked you to show me something from a computer that could generate a full stop song with vocals and lyrics and everything else, you would have been like, that doesn't exist. 2 or 3 years ago, you might have like that. We're 20 years away from that. And now on my phone, I can sit and spit out 30 country songs about like my day. And it sounds like country music. It's not good. I don't like country music to begin with, but like it's not good, but it's there and it's effectively a song. And honestly, I would say it's better than the songs that 99% of people can write because most people can't write music at all. And so that doesn't mean that it'll get better than the best. I don't know that like the next Comfortably Numb is going to come from AI, but it might, and it may be better than that, and it may be better than we can write.
Thumbs up for the Pink Floyd reference. So okay, so yeah, I like where you're going with this. So now when we're talking about generating, and again, when I think AI at like an Eastman, I would think, you got supply chain and all of that, and it's making predictions and this and that. But again, when we're generating content, though, that's different, correct? So can you, I guess,
Yeah.
can you tell me
So
kind of like how it looks versus like what AI are you using in general, and then what are you doing?
yeah. So I think, and I'll talk very generally here, but so
I want trade secrets. No, I'm
if we
kidding.
just think about text models, just like Chat GPT. Okay, so there's a few ways that you can think about like how this is a useful tool outside of writing poems about stuff. So the first way is we've been using natural language processing for years to do things like, what is this piece of text about? What's the topic? Give me a summary. What are the keywords? What are the most interesting words in this that don't appear in the normal English language? Translate this to a different language. So there's a whole toolkit of natural language processing tools that the new large language models have essentially given us a one-stop solution that is near or best in class for the entire toolkit. So that's the first thing is it's not even like, hey, what we can use this for is some creative expression of humanity. It's like I have a bunch of documents that I just need to figure out like who wrote it. And it's not clear because it's not at the top left corner in a clean format. It's like you got to read it to extract out who the writer was. It may be that I need to know, like, how often are we talking about something in all of these meetings we're having? I may just want meeting summaries. I mean, that definitely is the one of the first things that saved a lot of people time, is just having AI write meeting summaries for them. But if it can write a meeting summary, it could write a contract summary. It could write a summary of a, you know, an article that someone wrote a few years ago. It could help parse a couple hundred documents in a few seconds and get what are the main themes that are covered in all of them.
Yeah,
And again, we've
well, I
we've
don't
had
want to
tools for
interrupt,
them.
but I'm thinking law, like
Yeah,
law and the paralegal of the past, if you will.
yeah, and so we have dozens of places where we have documents at Eastman, and this is true for every enterprise. So, like, it's not just documents; it's audio files, it's images, it's video, it's stuff that you just couldn't before. I couldn't take that thing that has no structure and go, okay, well, here are the attributes of that thing, unless someone went and labeled them in the metadata. Here is who wrote this. Here is what it's about. Here are all of the key points. Here was a follow up that was needed from this. What's the takeaway? What's the point? That is super important to know. What is the point of this document? And almost never do we have that as a clean metadata thing that's attached to it that I can go, okay, this is what that document is about. So one thing that we can do is we can take this, like, almost unbelievable amount of unstructured data that we just couldn't do anything with before. We couldn't put it in a database. I mean, yeah, sure, you can have a document database, but you got to go label all these metadata fields, and each document's unique, and you may not even have the same structure or schema for each of these things. And I can go create that structure. And I can do it in a way that is testable, that's repeatable, that is very flexible, and sort of can be ill-defined almost in the beginning. And then I can, like, iteratively go through and build layers of structure on that. And now I could say, okay, well, look, I had all these documents that we wrote that I couldn't do anything with. And now I've created like thousands of bits and pieces of metadata. Now I could build a machine learning model, like a traditional model that does some kind of inference on this, that doesn't require a language model, that's way less stochastic, that's way more predictable. So that's the first thing. It's like language is a tool in a way that was very difficult to achieve without, like, a deep understanding of a bunch of NLP tools, and still very problematic even if you had that understanding just like 2 years ago. And so that's, I would say, the thing we exploit the most out of generative AI. And it's not creating something, but, like, fundamentally what we're doing is feeding it a bunch of text or audio or video or image and getting very strict structured text back out.
Well, and do you get how, like, I hate to say error, but like, because like obviously
Yeah.
like I think before the early application was you got a big data set, and let's say you have the bank ready to work with versus having to retype it all, and it might find relationships that you weren't even looking for. Now it's like, if is it summary of all of this data, how do you know if it's actually correct, or
Yeah.
how far off is it?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And so the first thing that I'll say is, it depends on what you want to do with it, but generally you always have to keep in mind what's the next best alternative. Like, if a person went and read it, how good would they do? Like, what would their error rate be? So one of the ways that we measure it is, like, the most boring. We sit and we pick a random sample of documents that we've asked to do something, and we go and we read them and we check to see if it's right, and then we build a confusion matrix. So we say, what percent of the time did it, often we're looking at yes, no, and that's when a confusion matrix is easiest. But even if we're not, we get some equivalent. We say, what percent of the time did it give us something affirmative that we agree with? Did it give us something affirmative that we disagree with? Did it give us something to the negative that we disagree with, and something to the negative that we agree with? And so that's one way that we like actually do this. We've had people on my team read hundreds of source documents to go through and categorize to say, can we trust this? We build automated test systems to do this as well. So we like build whole architectures to have it run, check for a truth that we already know in advance, and look to see, are these two things effectively consistent? And we have lots of tools for that. There's other very nice tools that OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, is provided, and lots of other companies in the space. So we look at the semantic similarity. We run more traditional NLP tools But a lot of what we do is both programmatic and manual. Like, is this thing correct? So that's one thing we do. We also look at benchmarks. We look at, like, we read research papers. We track with other companies and with the big cloud vendors to say, hey, where are you seeing successes with this? How is this failing? What does a failure mode look like? And we document a lot of these failure modes to try to understand, like, okay, as we continue to build, whether it's prompt engineering or parameter tuning or just like, this is a bad use case, don't do this. We try to understand that and develop an intuition for when it's usable. But the groundwork of like going and verifying a subset and collecting the statistics on that is always like the backbone of what we do.
All right, so on the generative side so far, then you've talked about more okay, you got all of these documents, whether they're handwritten or audio or whatever, and it's summing it for you. So, and then you look at the error rate, and is that rate usually pretty good?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the task, and we've found a lot of the time there's what is the peak theoretical performance, and then what is the implemented performance because of like our inability to do it better. So I would say that most tasks we've found that the error rate is somewhere in the like 1 to 20% range, which depends on the complexity of the task. It depends on the model. Like, the models, since we've been building, have gotten much better. We go back and rerun, we get much better results. The more complex the ask, the less likely it is to do well. That's also probably true for people. The more that there's like intermediate logic steps that are needed to do something, the more that it's challenged. And we've built different ways of approaching that. Sometimes we'll try to iterate multiple models. Sometimes we'll run the same thing, 5 times in parallel, and we'll take a vote from the answers and pick the one that was the most chosen. And then some stuff, like I said, we just realize, hey, look, it's not there yet. This isn't a good use case. We don't want to try that. But yeah, that's most of where we are today.
Well, I was thinking about quality control because, like, if you're just running an assembly line, and let's just say that you had, bad ones coming through, your odds of catching it visually are 80, or about missing it's 20%. So that's
Yeah.
about right where. But again, obviously, like, you don't want somebody going through documents over a year that AI could do in minutes or hours or whatever. If you have the same error rate.
Yeah, and so relative error rate, the cost to do I mean, a lot of times we just wouldn't ever have a person do it. Like, we have use cases where we would have a person do it, and we measured what that use case would be. We also, or error rate would be. We also just have times where it's like, look, we could do it with AI or we can not do it at all. But those are the choices, because it absolutely doesn't make sense as like a business case to have a person sit and read 1,000 documents and do this cataloging. There are a few other pieces. The error rate for humans is very unstable when it comes to repetitive tasks, especially mentally intensive tasks. So it was like, a good example would be, let's say that you have a bunch of documents that were written by engineers, like really advanced engineers, about how to do a task. They write like in the language of an engineer, and in the language that they think, that they write in their vocabulary. But if an engineer isn't the person who's supposed to read it, they may not have the same vocabulary. Now, of course, a person who's an engineer, you say, hey, like, the question you open with, answer this like I'm 5. Go through and write this like I'm 5. They can do that. And they'll do pretty good the first time. By the third one, it's so exhausting. It's so mentally fatiguing to do that they'll start cutting corners. They'll start shortcutting it. Translation is another task like this. Unless you're a person who loves translation, you're translating all the time, like, your first pass translation will be very good. But if you do it 8 hours a day for 2 or 3 weeks, you don't get better as you go. You get worse because you get bored. You get fatigued. That's not true with AI. It's much easier to have a stable idea of like how in control or out of control is the AI for this task. A person goes out of control with time. The other thing, and this is true for hallucinations, or I hate the term hallucinations, by the way, but this is true for times when the AI isn't performing the way you want it to. There is a trust metric that you have to, as a person with agency choosing to use it, that you have to define, which says, like,
if this is wrong, what is the consequence? And am I comfortable putting trust in it to do this task and accept that error rate? If it's write a contract that's going out to a customer, absolutely not. Like, I don't care what the error rate is. That's not something we would use generative AI for, because a person has to own that mistake. They need to be liable for that. And so even if it did that well enough, and self-driving cars are like a really good example of this. Like, because the consequence of a self-driving car killing a person is so high in magnitude, our threshold for expectation for self-driving cars is higher than it is for people, because people have agency, they have ownership. We can say you're liable for this. That's less true for AI. And so when we implement AI systems, and we give this advice to people at our company who use them, like use AI, like chat GPT type stuff, which we don't use chat GPT, but if they were using it, hey, like when are you okay using this? Well, when you can verify the output. And if you can't verify the output, if it matters, if it's something that you wouldn't feel comfortable putting out without vetting, don't use it for that. And so those are all pieces of what we end up using it for to do analysis.
The agency is important, obviously, because you can't just say, "Well, the AI told me to do it." I mean, I guess you could, but we'll see where that goes. So long story short, we're talking about creating documents, summarizing documents, translating those kind of things. What else are you using the generative AI for?
Yeah, so I would say that the next big thing is AI is an interface, speech is an interface, text is an interface. And so really what we're doing is whether it's voice in or text in or voice out or text out, we're using natural language as the way that we interact with a system. And so, you can think about like the easy way you do this now with your phone. You and I'm going to trigger it on my phone if I say it, but you said like, "Hey Alexa," instead of "Hey phone assistant. I want you to send a text message to Brad that says whatever." Okay, that's language as an interface. And before the current suite of generative AI models, we could do that for very narrowly defined tasks. Like, I can create a list of tasks, and within a certain range, I can feel very comfortable that I can ask an AI system to do something, and it will pick one of those tasks, hopefully consistently, and then it'll do it. With generative AI, we're able to do much more general tasks, things that we couldn't have done before, things that maybe we don't predefine, or we give much looser bounds on what we predefine. We can say, "Hey, look, I'm going to need you to solve a problem." And in the process, I don't say this, but it's going to have to take something from what I said. It's going to have to call an API. It's going to have to run a calculator to get some results back. And then it's going to have to tie all that back together and then write an email, and then I'm going to approve it, and it's going to send the email out. That's the future of what we're engineering right now is language as an interface to interact with technology in a way that's much more broad and general than we could have done before.
All right. I guess, are you using it for like marketing or like in-house? I don't know about in-house memos or whatever, but like, are you using it internally in other ways?
Yeah. So I would say we have high adoption of generative AI at our company. There are a lot of people using it. I don't want to go too into details about where specifically it's used, but definitely for writing things like memos or emails or messages, it's heavily used. And the place it's most used is not like creating content. Rather, I would say it's one, people who English is their second language and they know the gist of what they want to say, and they may write it in English and they use AI to clean it up or to make it more natural sounding, or they'll say it in their native language and have it translated. The other place that it's used is if you think about people's personality styles. I have like a super open, almost like thoughtless at times style. I'll just say something. I'll get it out there. I don't have any problem writing. It's not an issue for me. Some people really like to collect their thoughts, and it's very challenging to get a quick response out. And for those people, what we've seen is they integrate AI, they give it the bullets or the general idea, or they talk at it, and then it forms something that's ready to go that they would have struggled to get out. And so those are the places we really see people internally writing. Marketing and other things that are external facing, I think there's a lot more discussion about what we're comfortable with as a company and as a society.
All right. Well, as we close out here, I want to go back to Excel really quickly because I know we talked about you mentioned Python might be integrating into it. I know they're integrating Power BI, but that's a Microsoft product.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know I see Microsoft now, of course, with Bing trying to put Chat GPT, and are they trying to make Excel cool again? Whenever I do, I'll ask my students, hey, if you had a statistics class, they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, make me a histogram from scratch and tell me like what's happening. And they're like, what? And of course, it's like, well, we just had 1 week on it. We moved on with our life. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what? You know, it's like, you got to know if you got a normal distribution or your sample's normal or not. I guess to close this out, one, talking about where do you see the future of Excel? And then again, if you're just a non-IT person trying to get into this field a little bit just to understand it, what softwares would you look at? And then that can close us out.
Yeah. So first, I think Excel is extremely useful. It just creates problems long-term that frustrate me and other people. Python, so first off, the creator of Python, or the benevolent dictator for life, or former benevolent dictator for life, works at Microsoft, and part of his time is developing Python, part's integrating. So it will be integrated into Excel. They are doing a lot to modernize Excel and make it accessible. It has Chat GPT like functionality built into it now if you pay the extra for it. I think it is going to continue to be a powerful tool. Power BI is going to continue to be a powerful tool for business. It is also an infinitely frustrating tool. And I encourage people to really think, actually, in what you said, there was a great takeaway, which is like, look at the histogram and tell me what's going on. The most important skill you can learn is looking at a graph, looking at data, and telling what's going on here. That is important. If it's Excel, if it's Power BI, if it's Python, if it's the next thing, if it's just talking to Bing and that's where we do all our analysis in the future, okay, it doesn't matter. But like, the thing that's important is being able to look at a graph, look at a data set, know what graph you need, and go, oh, that's weird. That shouldn't happen. Here's what I should take away from this. That is an important skill. And whether it's Excel or Python or Tableau or whatever you choose, it'll be a different tool in 5 years. Excel may still be around. I hope not. But the skill is what's important.